President Biden announced his new plan to crack down on guns because that's going to solve all the crime. But there's some other stuff incorporated into that. And we wanted to take a deeper dive with the National Shooting Sports Foundation's Matt Manda to break down what this means. Matt handles public policy over at NSSF. Matt, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. There's two things that really strike me as super interesting. I mean, obviously, we knew he was going to go after ghost guns, which I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he really thought that they were just apparition firearms. But no one ever apparently acknowledges, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988. I mean, all of this stuff is already a law. The thing, though, that really, really concerns me, and I know that you and Larry Keane and others at NSSF have talked about, I like just PLCAA. It's the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. And it's kind of like a two-prong approach that they've tried to go after firearm manufacturers through this act. And so for those watching Matt and I just talk about this and who are unaware, they previously tried to go after gun manufacturers by saying it was like false advertising, or that they were essentially making a poorly made product, and they were trying to go after it for like a liability purpose. Neither of these make sense. But Matt, I'll ask you this, and I'm sure this is why he was relying upon his wingman Merrick Garland. But I mean, would they honestly be able to redefine legal terms in order to pass something like this on firearms manufacturers, or repeal it?
Yeah, well, we are watching intently to see what happens here, but it continues to go down this road. We saw a couple of months ago from the Rose Garden announcement on executive actions. Afterwards, the president was called out by media, Washington Post, PolitiFact, even CNN, calling his claims about the PLCAA false. The firearm industry does not have blanket immunity. It does not have special protections when third parties commit crimes using lawfully sold products. There was quite a bit of pushback there. So now it's been a couple of months and this is still being rolled out. Americans across the country, overwhelmingly millions, record numbers last year, and the pace is continuing, are taking the Second Amendment into their own hands by purchasing firearms legally at their retailer that is in their community, the best line of defense against these illegal straw purchases. But those folks are relying on the lawful commerce of firearms, and the president going after the PLCAA is really an unserious solution to a very serious problem we're seeing across the country with this spike in criminal misuse of firearms and violence.
Yeah, to illustrate this on radio earlier, Matt, you can tell me if this is a completely ridiculous, analogy, but I just think that, the firearm is the variable in this equation. I mean, ultimately, this could actually, if something like this were to be established, I mean, I don't see what sort of legal boundary could be erected to stop this from affecting every single aspect of commercial industry, no matter what the product is. Like, for instance, knives. And I love the phrase that they used, not really love, but where they said crime gun, by the way, when they were talking about this in their plan. Like, there's a whole separate section of crime guns at Walmart or something, or your FFL, where these are our regular legal guns and these are the crime guns that are for criminals. That's not how that works. But for the variable, it's like if there was a knife manufacturer and someone wanted to sue the knife manufacturer for a criminal taking that knife and stabbing someone to death, and they were trying to use the argument that it was the knife, the product, that was manufactured poorly, and as a result, they are liable for any injury that came from a defective product. That's the legal argument that they're trying to use. I can't imagine, even worst case scenario, Matt, something like that even standing up to legal scrutiny when it would be absolutely challenged.
Absolutely, and a common that we use, it would be somebody suing Ford for as a victim of a drunk driving incident. I mean, that is just absurd, and that's why there are legal protections for companies when criminals or lawfully sold products are used the wrong way. And it's funny you mentioned knives. As we know, the president and gun control advocates continue to go after modern sporting rifles, a semi-automatic rifle that is the most popular selling firearm in the country, rifle in the country. Combined, the fatalities from rifles, all of rifles, is far less than knives, hands, and clubs from previous years. So this is this is just not a serious solution, like I said earlier, to a very serious problem. Americans across the country, record numbers from across demographics. It is not just old white men who are stockpiling firearms. This is African Americans buying 60% more firearms than they did the year before. This is 42% of Asian Americans. This is 40% of Hispanics over the last year are buying firearms. This is people across the country. Women, 40% are buying firearms. They are taking their Second Amendment right into their own hand. And firearm retailers in their communities are lines out the door for safety courses, for training courses, for practice ranges. And again, these proposals coming from the White House and from gun control advocates in Congress, both the House and Senate, are not serious about addressing the very real problems of crime and criminal misuse of firearms across the country.